Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshat Teruma. Now, this week's Parsha is entirely about building the Mishkan, right? The Mishkan is the tabernacle. That is the predecessor to the temple. That was what we had while we were in the desert. All right, and the Haftorah is from 1 Kings chapters 5 and 6, and it echoes the Parsha. It's about Solomon building the first temple. So actually, pretty much the rest of the book of Shemot, Exodus, is dedicated to the building of the Mishkan. Many people have asked why the temple was built. We'll tell you that it was so that the children of Israel could offer sacrifices to God for their sins, right? I mean, that's part of the main argument that Christianity makes, that since we no longer have a temple and we don't have forgiveness for sin, we can't go to heaven when we die. Besides the fact that they've got so much about how God deals with sin and what hell is wrong, they've also got the whole point of the tabernacle and then later the temple's wrong. So what does it say in the beginning of this week's Parsha as to why we were commanded to build the tabernacle? It says in Shemot, which is Exodus chapter 25, verse 8, and they shall make me a sanctuary and I will dwell in their midst. That is from this week's Parsha. The whole point of the creation of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, was to facilitate a relationship with Hashem. It was about proximity. The whole organization of the sacrifices was secondary. The main point was that it would be a facilitator for us to have a relationship with Hashem. Did you know that the Torah spends one chapter on the creation, 3 chapters on the revelation at Mount Sinai, and 11 whole chapters to the Exodus from Egypt, but devotes 13 chapters, 13, to the building of the Mishkan? It goes into excruciating detail as to all the parts and pieces and exactly how they were to be made and how they were be put together. This is the detail that goes into making a dwelling place for God. And as you know, it is from the building of the Mishkan. If you recall, actually, I think that was like a partially deleted sentence. Anyway, if you will recall from last week's class, which we didn't actually have anybody attend, but anyway, we talked about the fact that our life's work is to make an abode for God here on earth. That every act that we do is to create a space that will draw God's presence, God's essence into this world. So our life's work is to make an abode for God here on earth, right? Every act that we do is to create a space that will draw God's essence and his presence into this world. Building the Mishkan is the prototype for our life's work of making our world into an abode for God. In fact, many of the commentators describe the Mishkan as a model of man himself or woman herself. The items within the Mishkan represent our various organs and faculties. For example, the Ark, which houses the Torah, is said to represent our mind, and the menorah is said to correspond to our eyes. So if you're familiar with the passage, the Mishkan has 3 dominions, or domains rather. The courtyard, or the outermost place, the holy, and the innermost Holy of Holies. These represent the 3 parts of the human being. The body being the courtyard, the holy place being the mind or the intellect, and the Holy of Holies being the soul. It's there in the Holy of Holies where the presence of God actually rested, and where once a year on Yom Kippur, the high priest, right, the Kohen HaGadol, would enter into the innermost place and actually be in the physical presence of God. And it's here within our heart, where the soul resides, when we learn to transcend the material world, that we meet face to face with Hashem. So what is the point of the outer courtyard? That was where the main altar was, and that was also where the daily sacrifices were offered. so too with us. It's through our physical bodies that we serve God on a daily basis. This is where we experience the reality, which we have to then internalize to draw us closer in. But the courtyard is where we function as a part of the greater whole. It's where we experience our daily interactions with each other, and where we are provided the events which are meant to teach us our greatest life lessons. You can't get to the holy place where you meet with God until you first make your way through the courtyard where you meet others. It's through our relationships with other people that we learn the lessons. Did somebody have a question? Okay, I thought I heard something. All right. It's through our relationships with others that we learn the lessons, once internalized in the holy place of our mind, that then we can meet with God. But experiencing the actual physical presence of Hashem, that was only found in the most holy place. That requires taking all that we learn in our daily lives and processing in our minds and move it to our soul so that it becomes a part of who we are. All right, so we go through these actions daily where we're interacting with people. We have that outer courtyard, and then we take it into the holy place, we process it, and then we bring it into our neshama, our soul, and that's how it becomes a part of who we are. So do you remember, I've spoken many, many times over the last year about the difference between knowing and believing, right? And I talk about the fact that there are a lot of things that we know that don't make a difference in our lives. Like, for example, many of us know what is healthy to eat and what isn't. We know it. We know it as it's a fact, but it doesn't change the way we behave. And yet we can believe things that may or may not be true. But belief is such a strong force that that's where change is actually accomplished in our lives. So the difference between knowing and believing. And what we experience in the courtyard becomes what we know in the holy place. But we cannot stay there. It must become belief. It must move from the head to the heart, from the holy place to the most holy place, where it's just you and God and no one else. So that's the lesson of the Mishkan and later the temple, that we use the things of this world to create a dwelling place for God within the world. But the goal is to move all of this to deep within our souls, because it's there that we meet with God face to face. And it's there that we experience what we were created for. But I'm sure that you've heard the saying, maybe you've heard the saying. Anyway, there used to be a saying, don't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. And that's what these 13 chapters are about. This is why God goes into great detail about all of the physical stuff that goes into the temple. The furnishings are placed in all three parts, each one with its own purpose and function, and each one is necessary. Everything we encounter in life, every person whose gaze we meet, every rock we stumble over, every difficulty we encounter, all work together to furnish the abode that we're creating so that we can meet with God. Nothing is by accident. Every detail is important and has been painstakingly chiseled to perfection to accomplish its appointed task in our lives. I say this all the time, sometimes because I really feel it and sometimes because I need to remind myself of it. But everything in life we need, everything we need in life we have, and everything we have in life we need. And like I said, sometimes I say it because I really feel it, and sometimes I say it because I need to remind myself. But everything we need in life we have, and everything we have in life we need. We may not understand why we need it, but the first step is to simply acknowledge that we do. And this is the lesson of the Mishkan. So that is, I think, the overarching take home that we can take home from this passage. Now, obviously, especially like the Zohar and a lot of the Hasidic and mystical teachings go into great detail about what each aspect of the Mishkan represents. I don't want to get that far in depth. I just wanted to kind of bring out that overarching concept that we get from reading these 13 chapters of all of the details that go into building the Mishkan. It was funny, last Shabbat, we were talking with somebody at one of our Shabbat meals, and something that's been mentioned many times kind of came up again, and that it's the idea that we know that the Torah is true. Now, this is tongue-in-cheek. It's not legitimate proof. But one of the ways that we can know that the Torah is true is because it would make a really bad novel. If you were creating a work of fiction, you would want it to be a whole lot more interesting. It has some pretty unreal stories in it, but it also has a lot of details. Like, who, if they were writing a book, who would spend 13 chapters explaining over and over and over again in excruciating detail each of the aspects of the temple? I mean, I could see maybe 2 or 3 chapters, but 13, right? So it's obvious that this was a document that was written as instructions to us, emphasizing the things that were important to us as a people and for future generations, what we could get out of it, either at the very basic level or, in Judaism, there's of course many levels of understanding of any particular passage.